Everybody hear me clearly? You okay here on the right? Yeah? Okay. So, just to tell you what we're going to do, our guest tonight, Níall Ó Murchú, and I interviewed Níall about, I think it's 4 or 5 years ago. And the same time I interviewed Níall, I interviewed Wim Hof, literally in the space of the same 2 weeks. And I thought to myself, well, Wim Hof's obviously going to be like a Zen monk or something. And this is the Irish Wim Hof, is the way I was looking at him at the time. And when I met Níall, I thought, Jesus, this guy feels like he's enlightened. He was so calm and so chilled. And then we interviewed Wim Hof, and Wim Hof was like a lunatic. He was running around an airport and he was talking about 20 things in the one sentence. And I was going, are these guys doing the same technique, you know? So I've been following Níall's work lately, and he's moved into what's called the blissful breath. And I did his 10-day breath work, like he does 10 minutes a day. And I started doing them about 6 months ago, and they're just like, they completely change your mood, like completely. Like, you know, sometimes you go in and you try and meditate or you do something and you can't really get a handle on it. But if you go in through the breath, what happens with the breath is, you know, if you're trying to change your thoughts to positive thoughts, it's a tricky process. But if you slow your breathing down, you actually begin to think differently. And I noticed that. And then this guy's voice, anybody heard any of his meditations? If you go home tonight, it's 10 days, do it. Just try it out, it's 10 minutes. His voice is like, he'll just be asleep. Well, we're trying to keep these people awake tonight, he'll be
for a while anyway.
So before we start anyway, just to say to you, Níall, you're very welcome. Delighted to have you back. It's been too long. Looking forward to this chat. And thanks for all that you do. And I can't wait to find out what's gone on for you in the last few years, because I'm sure loads has happened. So let's give him a big welcome to Positive Nights.
Thank you.
Are you on? It's probably not on yet.
We're ready to go.
You're ready to go. So before we start, we always just do a little centering thing. So I think it's very appropriate for tonight as well. We're just going to do a very short little meditation. And I'm going to invite you all to just let go of your day. And just drop in. Close your eyes if that feels comfortable. And get a sense of moving your energy into your heart center. So usually we kind of operate in the head. But move into your body, move into your tummy, move into your heart center. And take a couple of breaths into that heart center now. And just on the out breath, just feel your body relax and get very, very centered. And focus on the out-breath and just the length of the out-breath. Nice and slow and very, very deliberate. And feel your body relaxing into the chair. And if thoughts come, just let them go. Just let them drift on by. And as you're in the heart, I'm going to invite you now to move into feeling rather than thinking. So just check in with how your body feels right now. And when you get a sense of that, I'm going to invite you just to bring to mind or bring to heart a feeling or a memory in the last 3 or 4 months, that just something that happened in your life that really uplifted your experience. Some good news you heard, or somebody you met, just a smile or a moment. Just bring it to mind or bring it to heart and really feel into that feeling now in this present moment. Feeling of happiness or upliftment. And let's breathe one more time together into the heart center. And when you're ready, open your eyes. And bring a smile to your face. And just get a sense from the meditation of how you can kind of, in a couple of minutes, you can change your own kind of inner state, you know. And I mean, so many spiritual teachers are saying now that really the inner state is what's important. The outer will reflect back how you feel on the inside. So that brings us right into the breath, because the breath is just the most perfect hack into changing how we feel. So Níall, I suppose just to set the stage a bit, just if you can tell people what brought you into the whole world of breath. How did that all start for you?
My first experience of the breath was kind of quite traumatic. I was born purple, having not taken a breath in quite a long time. And from the point I was born till the point I was maybe 16, I really struggled with the breath. I had no control. I had really bad asthma. The cold used to trigger it, ironically. But it always gave me, there was this intense relationship with the cold and the breathing as a result. I feared the cold because it would trigger the asthma. And anybody who's not been able to take a full breath knows that kind of sense of panic that you feel when you can't breathe properly. So that was with me the whole time, but it always kept breathing. Myself and breathing were constant companions all the time. Not always good companions, but always companions. And it was in my early 20s when I had given up dreams of being a professional basketball player, and I had gone and looked for these answers to these big questions about who am I and what's life and all these things. And I'd gone to the Shaolin monks. They had opened a temple in London. I'd gone to learn how to fight, being a young man, still having all that stuff in me. And instead they taught me how to breathe, and they taught me how to meditate. And in the middle of this really hard physical training that they put us through, they'd stop us dead in our tracks and they'd make us breathe. And it was the first time that I could really feel how the breath could change how I felt from being, exhausted from the training, from being tired. All of a sudden I was refreshed from the breathing. And it was the first time when I really started to realize that in essence we are how we breathe. So if our breathing is erratic, we feel stressed. If our breathing is calm, we feel peaceful. And it was there was a cement ramp that they used to run us up and down all the time, doing press ups as we ran up and down. And it was on that cement ramp in North London that I started to realize that we are how we breathe. And that was when it started to open up in my mind the possibilities that at any moment, no matter what was happening to us, we had a choice. We had a choice to bring our attention back to our breath, and we had a choice in how we were breathing, and that we could change how we were breathing at any time. And that was, for me, that was the big mind-expanding moment where I thought to myself, I need to go and learn as much about this as possible.
And what age are you when that happened?
Early 20s.
Early 20s, okay. And what was the next step then? Where did you go?
So within martial arts, there's two divisions. There's the hard martial arts and there's the soft martial arts. So in the Shaolin Temple, they taught you how to breathe and to meditate, as well as the difficult physical training. So I got enough of the fighting after a while and kind of moved my attention to the softer internal arts, which was the breathing and qigong, breathing and meditation. And that led me down, that route then took me to, eventually to Wim Hof, and then eventually beyond Wim Hof. And, and all the time looking, even David here is a great yoga teacher, and, I studied pranayama with David and Paula there. So anywhere that anyone was teaching anything about breathing, I was there.
It's interesting the way life, it makes you somebody who has asthma. Because it wants to get your attention, right? And people have probably felt that in their own lives, that you're led into something and you're brought in by some kind of suffering to catch your attention, But when you mentioned Wim Hof, so the first time we would have spoken, I think, was Wim Hof your main thing, or were you kind of doing it all then?
Since since that time with the Shaolin monks, I'd been teaching people a little bit of breathing, meditation, Reiki. You know, I've been really trying to look at things that would help us improve ourselves naturally. By the time I met you, and I had studied with Wim Hof, it was like this puzzle had been in front of me my whole life, and there was one missing piece. And meeting Wim Hof was like the last little piece of the puzzle. Everything made sense then. All the work I'd been doing made more sense to me then. The cold, I used to swim in the sea as a teenager in Pomarnik, and then the breathing, Wim connected both of them together. So when I met you, having studied with Wim Hof then for a few years, it was the last little piece of the puzzle had just fallen into place, and then I thought to myself, okay, this is where this is the direction I need to go in.
Okay, so Wim Hof filled in a lot of blanks for you in some ways.
Wim is brilliant. Wim's like this pioneer on the edge of society. He goes off and sees what's possible way on the edge, and then he brings us back the knowledge. And with Wim, it's always like he opens the door for you. Like he opens the door to the possibility of the breath and the cold, and you decide then how far you want to go and explore that. And for me, it's like I'm going all the way in. I want to see what's in there.
And what's interesting is in my work with the magazine, you know, I get to interview a lot of different people, and what I noticed recently was that when you push the body into an extreme state, be it cold, be it hot, be it fasting, right? What seems to happen is when the body reboots, okay, it cleans itself out, it kind of enhances the cells. Lots of good stuff happen when we're in a crisis situation, right? So it seems like a lot of what, as people become more conscious, instead of going into a stressful situation and being terrified, which can happen in real life, right, sometimes, we're activating these situations where we're not terrified, but the body is under stress, but we know what's going on. We're breathing, we're increasing our breathing, we're fasting, and we're getting these incredible benefits, you know. Can you talk about some of the stuff that happens health-wise in relation to breath that you've seen?
Yeah, so in essence, there's a few things going on, but you describe their situation where a person is kind of voluntarily going into something that's stressing them out. They can also be terrified. So I've guided thousands of people into the extreme cold. The majority of them are terrified before they go in. They get out like a superhero, but they're terrified going in. And really what it's doing is it's voluntarily putting ourselves in a stressful situation. The heat, example, is a stressful situation. It can be as well. In order for us to learn how to deal with it. So the cold to me is a breathing exercise. The heat to me is a breathing exercise. We're putting ourselves into these very difficult situations, forcing ourselves into fight or flight. The body gets tense, the mind starts to focus on the worst case scenario, that anxiety that we feel. And then we are practicing what we need to do to bring ourselves down from the sympathetic, the emergency, the survival mode, and we're using our breath to bring us back down to the opposite part of the nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system, where we feel safe and peaceful again. So these situations that you described, they're tied into this idea of hormetic stress. So a little bit of stress is good for us. We learn how to deal with it. We become more resilient. As the stress starts to build, the benefit starts to build. The body gets stronger, learns how to deal with it. The body has to ramp up the immune system to learn how to deal with it. The body has to reduce inflammation to learn how to deal with it. And there's a point at which you reach the peak where the stress is at its peak and the benefits are at their peak. And that's the point at which we have to learn when's enough. So that's the time we get out of the ice bath. That's the time we get out of the sauna. That's the time we take a breath in after we've been holding our breath. Because after that peak, the benefits start to diminish quite quickly. So it's when we put ourselves into stressful situations in order to gain benefit from them, in order for the cold to be a force for good in our life, or the heat to be a force for good in our life, we have to know when's enough. And that's a trap some people, fall into.
Do they? Yeah, do they? So in terms of Wim's work, that would be the breath holds.
Yeah.
I remember the last time we had a few fellas in the audience who said they went blue, and you're like, lads, if you're going blue, you know what I mean, there's a problem.
Take a breath.
So it's this kind of macho thing of like, I can hold my breath the longest, So I mean, I think a really good example is a lot of people might swim in the sea. I swam in the sea years ago for the first time, and I was doing it and I got really into it. And then one day it was a beautiful summer's day, and I stayed in a bit longer than I normally did. And I got out of the water and it was like 26 degrees and I couldn't stop shivering. Yeah. And I didn't stop shivering until about 6 o'clock that evening, and this was 12 noon.
Yeah.
And I gave myself hypothermia by staying in probably 5 minutes too long. So that's a classic example of that. Yeah,
yeah, I think, hands up anybody who gets in the sea for a swim? A few people. So if you've been in the sea for a swim and you've been around the sea long enough, you know that there's a little bit of a macho thing about how long you get in for, which is not a good thing. The sea, the cold has to be respected at all times. If we don't respect the cold, it'll win. It'll show us who the boss is, like your example there. So really we only need a small piece of cold. It's less is more with the cold. So the idea is that we get into the cold, we feel that sense of shock and chaos. So anybody who's gone into the sea knows that sense of like, oh Jesus. And if we use our breathing then to come down and find that sense of control, we can find a sense of calm and control in the cold. And when we reach that point, when our breath is calm, our body is settled in, heart rate goes down, and the body is starting to adapt to the cold, that's that peak that I was talking about. Sometimes you get into the cold and you feel like I can stay there forever. That's the point, you need to get out, because that's the peak. Now that's a hard lesson for people to learn, because it's not about timing it. You'll reach that point at different times depending on where you are that day. But it's not about staying in for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. It's about finding that breath, that point at which you're relaxed into it and then coming out. And that's not always a long time. So anytime I go to the sea, people expect me to be getting in and spending 5 hours in the water. But I get in, find my breath, and I come out, and nearly every single time someone says to me, you weren't in there for very long. Expecting me to be lying in the sea for hours. But it's the idea that the cold is this incredibly strong force that we can use as something good in our lives. We can use it to enrich our lives. But like in your example, if we are staying too long in the cold and we have to then spend hours and hours warming up, we've gone past that peak. We have stayed too long, so maybe the next time we come back a little bit. But again, we live in a society where it's often seen that more is better. So longer in the cold is supposedly better. It's not, or holding our breath for as long as possible. It's not. So it's learning to listen to the body and knowing when's enough, which is counter to what a lot of the culture is about, measuring everything and timing everything. And so I do a lot of work with sports teams, and re-educating them about that is a tough job.
Yeah, because they're big into that.
Everyone in the ice bath for 10 minutes and they're all like this. Oh.
Yeah. We started a soccer game years ago for old guys like me, and we said no contact, right? And they were all looking at me on the pitch going, what do you mean, no contact? And I said, you can't touch anybody when you're playing soccer. He says, impossible. I said, yeah, but that's the goal. That's what we're going to try and do, so nobody gets injured. And now we have a game of soccer, nobody really gets injured. Everybody's trying to just play within their strengths, and it really, really works, And we got slagged about it for years, but now we've loads of footballers playing with us, because they say if they go and play a normal game, everybody just jumps on them and tries to kill them, so now they can actually play the game. I want to talk a little bit about, has anybody here ever had an ice bath? Okay, people have got in the sea, but you've had an ice bath. And anybody over here? No ice baths. I've never had an ice bath.
They're waiting for you. I have them out the back.
So we're going to bring them in now. Erica, if you go first. You brought your tug, yeah?
No need for the tug, that's right.
The thing about the sea is you can move. Yeah. So I always thought, at least I'm going to be able to move in here. So the sea is cold, but I move, right? And so when I see people doing the ice baths, I think, that looks more difficult. Talk to me about the difference between those two and the benefits, I suppose.
There's huge differences in the experience in nature and in an ice bath or a plunge pool or wherever it is. So really, if we're looking to use the cold as a force for good in our life, something that improves our health, that improves our mood, that makes us stronger, that makes us less tense, then we have to approach it in a very respectful way, and we have to learn how to breathe in the cold. Very specific way of breathing in the cold. And when we do that and we find that sense of calm and control, the science shows us that unbelievable things happen in the body. So when we find that sense of calm and control in the cold, inflammation is going down in the body for 6 days afterwards, which is unbelievable. When we think about inflammation as possibly the cause and effect of lots of the problems that we have, to be able to do that to our, be able to do it for ourselves is incredible. So being able to kind of focus on the breath is paramount to the experience in the cold. So in the ice bath, you get into the ice bath and it's just you and the cold. There's nothing else. So you have this battle on your hands to try and find the breath, to grab the hold of the breath, to extend the exhale, to find the exhale, to breathe out. And after about 5 or 6 of these long exhales, we might practice in a little bit, there's this switch in the nervous system. And I've seen it happen thousands of times. The person goes from, oh jeez, okay, and they start breathing, and they're like, and I'm saying, it's time to get out. And they're like, I'm going to love this, I'm staying in here. So we're trying to achieve the same thing in the sea. However, in the sea, we are scanning for danger all the time. Our nervous system is looking for what the surface is like under the water, the movement of the waves, the birds, everything is trying to distract us because we have to deal with it. So being able to focus and find that breath in the wild environment of the sea is much more difficult because there's so much going on. In the ice bath, it's colder, but it's just you and the cold. You don't have to worry about sharks or orcas or anything in there.
Okay. I'm going to try one.
You're
Therefore, I'm in.
welcome.
We
You're
wheel them in now for the break. So I want to go back to the breath. Okay, that's our main, and you call it now the blissful breath. And yeah.
Yes, it's to me. We had talked about it earlier. To me, I see breathing just like food. Food ultimately is nourishing first. Breathing is ultimately nourishing first. And like with food, there's all different types of food. Sometimes we need to eat this, sometimes we need to eat that, depending on what we need. It's the same with the breathing. Sometimes we need to breathe this way, sometimes we need to breathe that way. So what I saw was that there were so many different types of breathing. To me, the blissful breath is any way we breathe in a way that makes us feel better. So it's a term that I use for any of these ways you can breathe in. If it makes you feel better, then I think it's a blissful breath. It's something that we can use to improve ourselves, because there's so many types of breathing that people are sometimes put off by the amount of choice there is, the tyranny of choice.
At the door slamming, yeah. And I think this is a good one to touch on, because I've interviewed Patrick McKeown, Dan Brulé, yourself, and Wim. Okay, so all real breath experts. And everybody has that question, what's the most ideal breath? So we take that out of the equation, okay, and we say, and Patrick McKeown said, it depends what you want to achieve, okay? And what you're saying is anything that makes you feel better in that moment, yeah? And I remember Dan Brulé gave me a really good answer to that question, because he said, anytime you focus on the breath, that's a good one.
Yeah.
The fact that you're actually conscious of your breathing is a good one. Well, let's talk about, I suppose, different techniques to achieve different things.
Yeah.
Can you talk us through the main ones?
So I think what would be a good one would be, let's practice a little bit the breathing that we use in the cold. So obviously when people come to an event and they want to experience the breathing in the cold, they're learning how to breathe under the pressure of, it's like the ice bath is about this big, and they're sitting in an ice bath and there's about 40 kgs of ice sitting on their chest and their neck. You'll see it now in a second. So when they can breathe like that, when they can find their breath under that type of pressure, it's not about the cold. It's about the cold teaching us that we can find the breath under that extreme pressure. So they get out of the ice bath and they feel amazing, and there's all the scientifically proven benefits, but the real value is that they can go home. And when the pressure comes in whatever form it comes in, stress, anxiety, grief, trauma, worry, wherever it comes in, they then know that they can find that breath again. If you can find your breath sitting under 40 kgs of ice, you'll be able to find that sense of calm and control when all the other pressures come in your life. And they come, whether it's at work or whether it's at home. So really, that's to me one of the most important parts of getting into the cold, that it teaches us how to breathe under that pressure. And then that's something that we can apply to all the different types of pressure. Grief is a pressure. The heat is a pressure. The cold, stress is a pressure. Anxiety is a pressure. So if we can learn to find our breath, no matter what's happening, that's the real value. That there's a sense of freedom knowing that in the moment when the crisis is happening, that we can bring our attention back to our breath, and we can find the breath, and we can find that sense of calm and control no matter what's happening. So that might be a good breath to start with.
Yeah, do you want to do one now? You ready? Let's go. Bring in the ice pads, baby.
The beauty of it is you don't have to be in an ice bath. So if you want to just close your eyes for a second, if that's comfortable for you. And before we get into the breath, we're just going to prepare ourselves a little bit. So if you want to bring your full attention to your eyes, closing your eyes, and just allow your eyes to soften. And softening your jaw and your mouth, softening your shoulders, softening your arms and your fingers, softening your belly, softening your legs, softening your feet. And just for a moment, allowing your whole body to soften and to sink a little deeper into the chair. And now very gently bringing your attention to your breath as it is now. No changing the breath yet. Just listening to the breath. Just noticing how your body moves as you breathe in. And notice how your body moves as you breathe out. And perhaps you might notice that when we pay attention to our breath, that it begins to change. And within that change, we can take control of the breath. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to change our breathing. And by doing so, we're going to change how we feel. So when you're next inhale, breathing gently in. And slowly breathing all the way out. And when you get to the bottom of that exhale, breathing in again. And focusing on this long, slow exhale. And for the next few moments, your attention is on that long, slow exhale. The breath in is soft and gentle. The exhale, breathing all the way down. Finding your own pace, finding your own rhythm. To focus on this long, slow exhale. 3 more breaths like this, no rush, breathing in and breathing all the way out. And breathing in and all the way out. Final breath, breathing in and breathing all the way out. And when you're ready now, you can open your eyes. Come back into the room. So this is the breath that we use in the cold. This is the breath we use when we are driving on the M50 and we're late for that meeting. We can feel the pressure building in us. This is the breath we can use when we're under pressure at home or in work. And within 4 or 5 of these long, slow exhales, the vagus nerve starts to activate in the back of the brain. One of its main jobs is to get us from a state of agitation to a state of feeling safe and calm again. So by breathing out 4 or 5 times, vagus nerve activates, heart rate drops, and the body starts to feel calm again. But not only feel calm, the body starts to feel safe again. And when we're safe, then we can start to adapt to the cold, or we can adapt to the pressure, or or we can adapt to whatever the struggle is that we're facing, just with that long, slow exhale.
People feel that? I've been listening. I've been listening to you for the last 6 months, and now he's sitting beside me. It's like I got this live.
I'm here beside you.
Jesus. I mean, what his voice is just unbelievable, isn't it? Check it out. It's called The Blissful Breath, and it's his website. It's brilliant. It's just so you're gone. I mean, and I want to go into the vagus nerve a bit, because the vagus nerve is interesting, right? Because it's the main. It's rest and digest, yeah? It's the parasympathetic. And most of us are rocking around in the fight or flight, low level. I mean, even when you're checking your phone, your fight or flight's activated. You know the way the phone gets us like that. So getting into this space of rest and digest, the more we can get into that space, the more it starts to bleed into our daily life. So that when we're checking our phone, we can stay. You know, I'd imagine that you've developed a way now of keeping this as much as you possibly can in your life, yeah?
So we're built in this incredible way to deal with stress. And stress is an important part of our existence. You know, without stress we wouldn't be sitting here as we are, evolved as we are. So we have this incredible way of dealing with it. As you said, it's fight or flight. We jump up into fight or flight. It releases all this energy. It takes energy from our digestion. It takes energy from our immune system and gives us this ability to deal with the perceived threat or whatever it is. And we also have this amazing ability to come back down out of that. As you said, moving from one part of the nervous, now we're using very simplistic terms, but moving from one part of the nervous system down to the other part where we feel calm again. And the best way of doing that is through this vagus nerve. You know, it helps us go from one way to the other. And the breathing is a big part of that. So we have in us already this inbuilt system to deal with threat and to come back out of the threat. So when we're in the threat and we're in that emergency mode, in that fight or flight, that survival mode, the body isn't doing anything long term. It's just dealing with the problem. So let's say we're in a war and we're being attacked and, you know, we're running for our life. There's no point in the body trying to rebuild itself for 6 months' time if it's not going to survive this attack. So it gives us that level of energy to deal with it. And after that then, it has a natural ability to come back down out of that so we can start to rebuild and start to heal ourselves and restore ourselves. But as you rightly said there, the way our lives are at the moment, not for everybody, for a lot of people, is that there's no chance for the body to come back down out of this fight or flight, because every time we scroll or every time like online or we perceive something, even though it's not a threat, our body jumps back up into fight or flight. So being able to spend, and that even a few minutes every day, doing something as simple as the breathing we just did, just focusing on our exhale, just gives us that ability to come back down out of it. And of course, the alarm clock goes off, we jump back up, but it's like training ourselves. If we're stuck, they use this kind of description like the cave. You know, so in the old days, we used to be inside the cave, and the cave was our sanctuary. It was a place of safety. We'd eat in the cave, we'd sleep in the cave, everything was lovely in the cave. When we went outside of the cave, all of a sudden we were in fight or flight. We were fighting for our lives, we were hunting, we were being hunted, we had this amazing energy to deal with it. But when we come back to the cave, we could eat again, we could recover again. The problem nowadays in the cave is we're flicking through Twitter in the cave. So our sanctuary is kind of being invaded by that a little bit. So the ability just to take a few minutes every day to breathe or to meditate or whatever it is, to take our minds back down into this place where it's calm again, is vital to our health. Because otherwise we're not rebuilding, otherwise we're not healing, otherwise we're not giving ourselves time to recover. So that even, like the Blissful Breath, my book, the reason it's focusing on 10 minutes of breathing every day is just to try and give us those 10 minutes not to be outside the cave, to bring us back into our sanctuary where we can start to recover again, even for 10 minutes. And it has a huge effect on our health when we do that.
And it's a brilliant thing to do before you meditate.
Yeah.
because sometimes you go into meditation and you say, oh, I can't get my thoughts slowed down. But the breath, 10 minutes, you're going to have a different caliber of thought going into the meditation. Do you use it a lot in that sense as well?
Yeah. So I use the breath as much as I can during the day to deal with whatever life has to throw at me. So I have 4 children. They're all a bit older now, but they were under 4 under 4. So I needed all the breathing I could get to deal with that. But yes, it can improve your ability to meditate. It can improve your ability to perform. If you have to do something in work, it can improve your ability to recover. Whatever we need to do, no matter what answer we're asking or question we're asking ourselves, breathing is some part of the answer.
I'd like you to, we had this little chat before we came on here. I'd like you to talk me through a real life situation where you're in a very tricky spot. Okay? Just really talk the last year or whatever, something intense has happened in your life and you've saw the breath bring you back. And sometimes people will say, well, that's a really dramatic situation. I need to be dramatic to deal with this situation. But that's actually not true. The calmer you are in the situation, you're still going to have to deal with whatever's happening. But the calmer you are, the better you are to deal with the situation. Is there something in your own life?
Yeah. So if we go back to this idea of the body moving into fight or flight, this amazing mechanism we have for dealing with whatever the intense situation is, to accompany the physical reaction of it, the mind also starts to focus on the worst case scenario in order to prepare for it, to help us survive it. That's what the anxious thoughts are. So when we're faced with something difficult, not only do we feel tense, the mind starts kind of closing and narrowing on this worst case scenario. That's why you're thinking, oh, fuck, So the breathing helps us to open that up. And so the example I would give you is, I was in Google maybe 5 months ago, and I was in one of their beautiful buildings doing a breathing session with their staff, and it's all beautiful and everything's lovely. And I got a phone call, and it was from RTE saying, look, we're doing a program, we want to bring these fellas through some Wim Hof ice baths that will help them in their life. Would you be interested in coming in and doing it? I said, yeah. When is it? It's in 3 hours' time. I said, yeah, grand, okay. Where is it? Mountjoy Prison. I was like, okay. So can you bring these prisoners through? Yeah, okay, grand. They don't know anything about Wim Hof. How much time do I have with them? You have 20 minutes preparation with them. And it was just like this amazing opportunity. So I said, of course, I'll go and try and help these fellas. So we were in Mountjoy Prison, and it was in the depths of winter. It was very, very cold. And the old prison where we were is like 5 stories like this. And so they had me, I had no preparation, never met them, they had no idea what they were doing. And it's not something that could be, it has to be respected. The cold has to be respected. So I was standing on the bottom deck, and they were bringing them down to me, and a kind of like semi-riot happened up on the top deck, so we were trying to like shoot this thing, and I'm trying to talk to them. And the camera's about to roll, and the director's saying, okay, in 5 seconds they're going to come down here, and you have 20 seconds to tell them what to do. Then we're going to go outside, and there's a riot going on up there. So, okay, are you ready? And like in that situation, you're going to, I better take a breath or two here, So in that situation, the natural instinct is the body starts to tense at the uncertainty of it. The mind starts to become, focus on the worst case scenario. What happens if I don't know what to say? What happens if that riot up there comes down here and we're filming? All these things. So in those moments, that exhale is the thing that saves the day. That long exhale. I know within 3 or 4 of those long exhales, I can feel my heart rate slowing down, my shoulders start to soften, and I can remember what I meant to tell these fellas when I meet them. And then they come down the stairs and off we go. But in that moment, there was every type of uncertainty you can imagine. There was nothing certain in those moments. But that can be the same for a person at home. That can be the same for a person in work. That can be, we can find ourselves in these incredibly uncertain positions and having to do something we don't know really what we're going to do next. So that breath just gives us the time and the space for the mind just to open up a little bit, to give us a little bit of perspective on what's going on.
So that to me like sounds like a challenging situation, right? But if say you're dealing with one where you've got some kind of mad psychological fear coming over somebody. This is like, you know, that feeling when you're like, I've experienced it where like I'll say to myself, okay, just keep the breath, and a cascade is coming in relation to the fear. So I'm just interested in that, you know, when someone has a real strong fear. You've obviously worked with people with that.
So we're just back from Poland. We're on a winter expedition with Wim Hof. And what's so amazing about Wim Hof is that he makes the impossible things seem normal. So the example I'll give, 6 years ago when I was training to be a Wim Hof instructor, the academy is up in the Polish mountains. It's usually minus 10 degrees, minus 20 degrees. The river that we use is frozen solid. There's a waterfall there that kind of freezes sometimes right in midair, and we're in the water and all that kind of stuff. And back 5 or 6 years ago, Wim took us up to jump off the waterfall. It's about 10 meters down into an icy river, and that was seen to be wild behavior back then. Wim has now made that part of this expedition. So this expedition, 100 people come from all over the world to come to Poland to experience this. You have every type of person, you have every age, every colour, every job, everything you can imagine, every level of health, good and bad. So now it's normal now that Wim takes them and they all jump off this waterfall. 100 people jumping off this. The fear you see in people is palpable. You can feel it from them. So I'm a lead instructor with Wim, so I have a group of 25, so I bring my 25 to the top. Some of them are looking down over the edge, and this is where the breath, no one has to do it, you know, it's not a mandatory thing, but this is where the breath over the fear comes in. Because when you look over that edge and you're looking down 10 meters and then the 10 meters below it, and you have to jump off it, or if you want to jump off it, people are terrified. I did it a few times, terrified. But when you get to that edge, you have a choice, like we have a choice in all the things that we do. We have a choice in how we breathe. So the reaction when you get to the top is like, you know, breathing goes. But in that moment, we have a choice. So there was this woman in our group, really nice woman from Brazil, lived in London, about 45, not great health, not great fitness, really struggled with everything that we did all week. She stood on the edge there, and she battled with herself for about 3 or 4 or 5 minutes. And as the more time passed, the more difficult it is to jump, the more paralyzed. But she was trying to find the breath. And about 4 minutes into it, she got a hold of the breath. She took 2 or 3 breaths, and I was saying to her, now Nubia, on the next breath, just breathe out and step off. And after about 5 minutes, boom, in she went. She got out like a new person. Every fear that she had faced in her life was surrounding her at the top of that waterfall. So when she used her breath to get over it, she came out like a different person. All of a sudden, and I was saying to her, if you can do that, you can do anything. And it's the breath that overcomes that fear.
And how it bleeds into everything, you know. I mean, maybe it's, you know, the one thing I said at the beginning here is that it's very hard to change your thinking. You know, spiritual teachers have been saying for years, you know, positive thoughts. It's tricky, okay? And people will say, I can't do it, you know, it's like, it's tricky. But the breath is a brilliant hack in, because what happens is your thoughts change because of the way you're breathing. And you don't really know that until you experience it. You go, I'm thinking differently. You know, I'm thinking more calmly. Like, we'll use sport as a big example. You work in sport as well. And, you know, guys stepping up to take the big shot, to go for the point, to knock it over the bar, tennis players, in that critical moment where they have to, we've all played sports, and you've got to just get really, really focused and really clinical. Is the breath the answer there as well? I know you're going to say it is, yeah?
The breath is the only answer there. Because as you said, the mind is such a tricky thing to get a grasp of. So the breath gives us this bridge into the mind. So in those situations when they're in Croke Park and there's 80,000 people screaming one way or the other, and they have to kick the ball in that direction. If you'd say to that person, okay, hold on a second, now I want you to grab a hold of your mind now and relax the mind there and just, make sure all your training works properly. That's nearly impossible.
Yeah.
But when they know that all they have to do is breathe out slowly 4 or 5 times, and they know then that the heart rate will go down, the body will relax, and then the years and years of training flow through the body. It's all in there. They know how to kick the ball. But when they're tense, it's not the years and years of training, it's the tension that's in the body then. So I had, he was a great British Olympic champion, and in his sport, he had a problem. He won the Olympic gold, but he had a problem. In his sport, they came to the start line and they had 90 seconds before they started the race. So that 90 seconds for him had become torture, because he'd get to the start of the race, he'd know he had 90 seconds, and in that 90 seconds he would have already, that worst case scenario, he would have fallen over there, he would have had a penalty there, he had already undone all his training in that 90 seconds. So his coach brought him, and they're saying, what can we do in those 90 seconds? So all we taught him in that 90 seconds was the breathing we've just done. So for 90 seconds he'd stand there, he'd focus on his exhale, and by the time that 90 seconds was over, he was relaxed, his body was soft, his mind was open. So his years and years and decades of training, he could just do what he could do then. He wasn't worried. So the mind, we can shape the mind through the breath for lots of reasons. One of them is that our brain takes in however many trillions of messages every second from the body, from all over the body. It prioritizes the ones from the lungs, because obviously if the lungs are in trouble or stop working, it's game over. So if the brain is listening to the messages from the lungs all the time. So if the lungs are moving calmly and smoothly, the brain is starting to absorb that and reflect it down through the body as well. But if the lungs are moving quickly and erratically, and we're feeling, that's when we're starting to we feel the exact way we're breathing. So if we're breathing calmly, we're feeling peaceful. If we're breathing erratically, we're feeling stressed. So there's a relationship all the time between those two things. And that's really where the practice of the breathing becomes so valuable then, because we can change the breathing at any time.
There's a book by James Nestor. It's called Breath. It's an amazing book. If you haven't, it's I would say it's probably the best book on breaths for anybody who wants to start off, because it goes through every single process. And this guy actually wires people up to find out what the physical benefits are inside the human body. So he kind of does what Joe Dispenza does for meditation, for breath. So immediately he shows you, how it works. One thing I wanted to say before I go into the next question, Níall, was when I was doing the focused breathing, I'd be going, say if I'd gone to do a big event or something, and I'd be feeling a bit panicky. So I'd focus on the breath in the car, and I was doing the 5 in, 5 out. Nestor says that 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out through the nose. Nasal breathing is probably more beneficial than through the mouth in most circumstances, I would imagine. Anyway, he said that's a really good general one to do, 5 in, 5 out. Driving the car, doing that. And what I noticed was, not only was I calmer, but I couldn't think. Because when you're focused on your breath, and it's a classic meditation tool, you're not thinking. So I kind of get to the event and I go, geez, I haven't really thought about the event. So the thing I'm panicking about, I didn't have a chance to think about it because I had to count 5 in, 5 out. Yeah. So I thought, well, that's a good little side benefit. Yeah. And then I'm also calm on the inside, Yeah. So anything to add to that book about Nestor and stuff?
Yeah, James Nestor's book is an amazing book.
Yeah.
For some people it might be a little bit too much, but for anybody who has an interest in breathing, it's definitely something that's essential reading. And the coherent breathing is what he's describing there. So breathing in for an equal count to breathing out. And what's really fascinating about that is that the let's say it's in for 5 or 6 seconds, out for 5 or 6 seconds. But if we start to elongate that, if we breathe in for 10 and out for 10, and we go deeper and deeper into these incredible states of peace. So some of the practices and some of the oriental ways of breathing, they might breathe 1 breath per minute. So it's 30 in, 30 out. Now that's hard work, but after a few minutes of doing that, we are different, but obviously we're not going to start there. You start with in for 4 and out for 4, but it just shows us that the breathing can be there to help us therapeutically and to help us prepare for something, but there's also a deep, deep spiritual side to breathing as well. And that something as simple as elongating our breath in and our breath out can take us to a place like that as well.
And I want to explore that a bit more as we go along actually tonight, the spiritual aspect to it. Do you want to do one now for people, like maybe we're talking about that kind of panicky one, if you're in a panicky situation, one that springs to mind, but you'll know best what's the best. The Navy SEALs use a technique called box breathing. So they would be in intense situations, right?
Yes.
But you, whatever you feel.
Yeah, I think we might do a little bit of box breathing. What I'm going to do is actually I'm going to combine a few ways of breathing so you can get a sense of a few of them. We'll do them together. Anyone done box breathing already? So a good few people. What I love about box breathing is that it's the Navy SEALs who made it famous, not particularly well-known wellness advocates, but they'll do it. Okay, so you want to close your eyes again and I'll just guide you through some breathing. So again, just bringing your attention to your eyes and letting your eyes soften. And really allowing your jaw to soften now in your mouth. And your shoulders, your hands. We're going to begin like we did before by breathing in and slowly breathing all the way out. And continue to breathe like that with a focus on that long, slow exhale. There's no rush. Just breathing slowly all the way out. Twice more like this, breathing in and slowly breathing all the way out. And your next exhale, trying to soften the shoulders a little more as you exhale all the way out. And on your next inhale now, breathing a little deeper into the belly, feeling the belly rise and the breath rising a little more, and then breathing all the way out. So the breath in begins in the belly, rises through the chest, and then breathing all the way out. Finding your own rhythm. The breath in is full. The breath out, breathing all the way out. 2 more like this, breathing in and breathing all the way out. 1 more, breathing in and breathing all the way out. On your next inhale, breathing deeply in for 2, for 3, and now holding the breath for 2, for 3, breathing out slowly for 2, for 3, holding the breath now for 2, 3, big breath in, and holding this breath for 2, 3, breathing out for 2, 3, holding now for 2, 3, last time, big breath in for 2, for 3, and holding now for 2, 3, breathing out for 2, 3, and holding the breath for 2, 3, big breath in, and a calming sigh. Twice more like that, big breath in, and letting go. Last time, big breath in, and letting go. And just let your body rest for a moment. Let your breath find its way back to its natural rhythm. And what I love about breathing together is that the science shows us that when we breathe together, it releases oxytocin in the system. So it's a bonding chemical. So when we're breathing together, we feel a stronger sense of communion with the people around us. And there's even a theory that when we breathe together, we begin to feel a stronger sense of communion with the environment around us as well. So even another reason to breathe together.
I'm actually drooling. So, people feel that? Anybody want to share anything about that, or? That was like your greatest hits. Yeah.
See, what I love about the breathing is, and this is where it comes back to the idea of the blissful breath being whatever we need, however we need, whenever we need it, is that we can weave together the breathing in whatever way we need to produce, to get us where we need to go. And I think that's, for me, so important. It's like they're like ingredients. You just mix them together for whatever you need. Once you know them, then you can start to use them in that way.
And they suit different people accordingly, really. It's to decide what it makes you feel. Particularly the sigh one, for some reason, really kind of, I feel that a lot, that it really down-regulates my system.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And we had talked about it before, like we sigh for that exact reason. We sigh naturally during the day, to let go. So, that's another one we can do a little bit later on, but that just sigh, letting go. We hold on to so much stuff. Our bodies hold on to so much tension. We hold on to so many things in our minds, thoughts or grudges or fear, whatever it is. And then all of a sudden we breathe in and we let it go. So when we start doing that repeatedly in a breathing session, it can become quite emotional for people, because all of a sudden they're not holding on to the thing, they're actually letting go of it, and that can help it come out.
And I think that's, in nature, animals let go. You see them in the wild when they get chased, or they just do this whole shaking thing. That we are in the wild as well, and we need to find a way to let go, because life constantly is giving us stuff to deal with. So the breath is a brilliant, anybody can do it. It's so accessible, and it's a way of releasing. It's a brilliant way of releasing. So I want to ask you now about the spiritual component. Obviously, so I'll ask you with the $1 million question, like, what is the breath? Is the breath some link to the non-physical, to another dimension? I mean, where would you go with it? You've explored it so much. What's your view on what the breath actually is?
My view on this is changing all the time. If you would have asked me this question a year ago, you'd get a different answer, and a year before that, and ask me again in 5 years, you'll get a different answer. My understanding now, just from my own practice, where I'm going with this in my theory at the moment, is that the breath may be our consciousness. So, let's say when I was 14, my uncle died, and I remember he was this big character, and I remember going into the nursing home, or not the nursing home, the funeral home on Walkinstown Road there, and seeing his body. The first time I saw a dead body, and it wasn't him. Anyone who's seen a dead body of a loved one knows, they just look different. And I remember thinking, what's gone? What's gone from him that makes him look like this? And I always come back to him again when I'm thinking about the breath, because the breath is the first thing we do when we're born. And there's this beautiful link between the cold and the breath. It's the cold of being born on our skin, the cold sensation that triggers our first breath, that opens up the lungs, that triggers our life, is the cold. So there's this link with the cold from the beginning. But when we die, then our breath leaves the body. So my where I'm exploring now at the moment is that within the breath, is that our consciousness? Is that our experience of this experience? Is it in the breath? Is the breath the thing that the more we pay attention to, the more aware we become of things? The more we pay attention to the breath, the more open we become. The more we pay attention to the breath, the more loving we become. So for me, that's where I'm kind of wrestling with now. Is the breath the consciousness? I don't know. But that's where my kind of theory at the moment is that I'm exploring.
That's where you're going, yeah, that's where you're going. So in some research that I do, near-death experiences is something that always catches my eye, and they would speak about being in another place. And the way they would describe it is that they're in another dimension, like we'll say maybe an astral plane or something like that. And they talk about light and breath. And they say that they can feel like they're breathing, but that the air around them is breathing them simultaneously. So there's this quality in the air that they feel like it's more, more translucent. Everything seems to be more. So the breath is like they're drawing from wherever our source or wherever the creator is. That it's more tangible in this other place. We don't see it as obviously here. The way you see your breath in the cold sometimes. And so that's interesting where you're going with that. I really wanted to see where you were going with that. Yeah.
But also, are we actually breathing? Or is the breath breathing us?
He's good, isn't he? I mean,
These are the things I think about all the time.
Are you serious?
I spend for me, a beautiful life is having time to study this and to practice this and to teach this. That's all I ever want to do. So these questions that you're asking me are like the daily things that I kind of explore when I'm practicing my breathing. Yeah.
Wow. So you've got your dream job, yeah?
I have my dream job.
That's brilliant, well done. So we'll go on for a bit longer, and I wanted to ask people if they had any questions. So I've been chatting now for about an hour, I think, is it? So if you guys have any questions, we'd love to throw it out to the floor if anybody has anything they want to ask. Yeah?
Just what about your when you breathe in, you breathe in through your nose and you breathe out through your mouth. Is that correct?
I suppose ideally we should be trying to breathe through our nose as much as possible. And sometimes though we have a better sense of control of the exhale when we breathe through our mouth. But in my experience of guiding people through extraordinarily stressful situations like the cold, when we feel under pressure we start breathing through our mouth. It's a natural part of fight or flight. So part of the training is also learning to control that breath. So we're going to be pushed into situations all the time where we're going to find ourselves breathing like this. So if we have some sense of control of mouth breathing, that's also a good thing. We need to know how to use it properly. But also, and in James Nestor's book, nearly every way we measure health improves if we're breathing through our nose. Our nose filters the air, cleans it, humidifies it, kicks off a little chemical that improves our immunity. So we should be trying to breathe through our nose as much as possible. Now, when I first started back in the old days, I thought from martial arts, my nose was broken from martial arts, so I thought it was the usual, I can't breathe through my nose, and so I was breathing through my mouth. But what happens as well is that if the nose isn't used frequently, it starts to kind of close over a little bit. But so likewise, if we start to breathe a little more through our nose, the passages become clearer. So I actually hadn't got a blocked nose, it's just that I hadn't used it for probably 10 years. So the more I started to breathe through my nose, the more it started to open. So my advice is anyone sitting here trying to breathe through their nose desperately, because your man said I have to breathe through my nose, just breathe. Just keep breathing until you find a way that suits.
Yeah, good question. That's a good question because it comes up a lot, and Nestor talks about it. He does the mouth taping at night. There's a gas podcast with the happy pair and he talks about going to bed at night and his wife sees him and he's got a blindfold on and tape on his mouth. He looks like he's going to rob a bank or something.
But for any people, especially any men in your life of a certain age, they start to snore a lot as they get older. And that mouth, so you can just buy kind of these little tapes that go on your mouth like this to keep them closed. It is unbelievable the difference it makes for people with sleep apnea, for all types of problems, just by forcing the body to breathe through the nose at night. It's actually Patrick McEwen, a great kind of academic living in Galway. His company have special mouth tape that you can buy.
It looks a bit mental, but it works. So don't go home and put it on your husband though tonight without telling him. Yeah, because we're not insured for that. Complaints from husbands. So anybody else got a question? Yeah?
Thank you both, first of all. Anyway, I was so engaged in your discussion this evening, and just say the Wim Hof breathing versus the blissful breathing. What would be the difference in the result out of each? Like, I've definitely went to some high places through the Wim Hof breathing and just had that sense of bliss. I was saying that it's not about going into meditation after. I find that I'm definitely a lot more ready for it, but also I find that with the blissful breathing. So what is the difference in what happens to the physiology of both?
So Wim's breathing is amazing. You know, Wim learned how to breathe like that from the cold. So for anybody who might know Wim's story, he had 4 young children, and his wife tragically one night kissed them all goodnight and went up on the 8th story and jumped. So to help, you know, he was grief-stricken and heartbroken, and to deal with the grief of that, he was getting into the canal in Amsterdam, and the cold was the only thing that would help him forget momentarily about his loss. And he found that from the breath, you get into the cold and you have to take these big breaths, and slowly over time he realized that he couldn't get to the cold all the time because he had the 4 children, so he'd mimic how he had to breathe in the cold. So Wim's way of breathing is very powerful and can get us to places, you know, very quickly. So for anyone who might know it, it's maybe 30 or 40 breaths into the belly, up to the head, and letting go. And at the end, we hold our breath, and we're holding for as long as is possible. And in that hold, because of the way we've been breathing beforehand, without getting too technical, the CO2 level is so low in the body that it allows us to hold our breath for longer. So it takes the body into this place where we don't usually go to, where there's this deficit in oxygen. And in that moment, the whole body is trying to strengthen itself, like to try and help us to use whatever we have and to take that next breath. So it's amazing. So it improves our immune system, it lowers inflammation. There's loads of amazing things like that. But the breath holding isn't for everybody. So if a person's pregnant, they can't do the breath holding. If they have epilepsy, they can't do the breath holding. It's not advised for children or teenagers to do the breath holding. So it's, you know, so it's amazing for a lot of people. But in those gaps were the places I wanted to help people as well. So that's where I went off and trained in other ways of breathing. So to kind of come back to your question, for me it comes down to, in a way, it doesn't matter what way, what technique you use. To me, ultimately, we're going to the same place. And for some people, it might only be this way, or it might be this way or this way, or it might just be Wim Hof, or it might not be Wim Hof, it might be something else. But ultimately, I think we're heading in the same direction. So for the person there who's saying, yeah, but I don't like that way, I like this way, just spend a little bit of time consciously focusing on your breath, and you know the results will speak for themselves.
I mentioned this to Níall before we came on. We interviewed this guy, Dan Brulé, and he's like a real breath master, and he spoke about his son committing suicide, and there was quite a dramatic thing in his life, you know, obviously, and he said that he used his breath to process the grief in the middle of the grief. Like, he went straight into the grief and used, and this is a real extreme circumstance. I never heard anybody talk about it. This guy is like, he's doing this work 40, 50 years. He works one-on-one with people, and he said, I had to practice what I preached. I couldn't get into a crisis situation in my life and abandon all my principles, you know. So he said, I went right into the breath. And he said, I still had to go through the enormous pain of this process, but I had my friend with me. I had my breath with me, you know. So, you know, that's a real extreme circumstance. Yeah. But at the same time, we're not negating any experience. We're just saying, try to stay as calm as you can, as centered as you can, no matter what's going on around you. Yeah.
And it just helps you to feel those emotions more. As we said, you're not trying to push the emotions away, but if you can use your breath, and it mightn't even be to find calmness, but if you can use your breath just to find that little bit of space within you to feel the grief, it allows you to feel it more. it might help you to process through it a little bit faster. May not, but it may also.
Yeah, yeah. And I suppose, we translate the breath into any, we can bring it into sleep, into grief, whatever it is that we need. We can start to really get to know our own breath, and the best way to use it for different life circumstances. That's really what you're advocating now. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like we said at the start, the breath can tell us so much about where we are in ourselves. So for example, if a person is practicing the cold a lot, some days they might get into the cold and immediately be able to find their breath, and they feel calm and they feel great, and they're done. Other days they'll get in and it'll be a struggle to find that breath, and it'll be a struggle to calm it down, and it'll be a struggle to get a feel for it. And that's a reflection of where they are that day. And sometimes we wake up, and if we're doing any kind of, let's say, box breathing or Wim Hof breathing, any kind of breathing where we have to hold our breath, sometimes we might be holding our breath for a little bit, and you might think to yourself, Jesus, I can't hold it for more than a few seconds here. Or some days you might be able to feel you can hold it for 5 minutes. Again, reflecting where we are that day, because we're different every single day. And when we're listening to the breath and we're listening to our bodies, it can tell us a little bit about where we are that day.
Just a show of hands, who's done the Wim Hof technique? Okay, not very many people have done. Okay, just a couple, yeah. You haven't tried it? No.
No, but breath work I advocate all the time.
Yeah.
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 So powerful.
Yeah.
Brilliant, yeah.
Patrick's work's great.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I was going to ask about you're working with children, and you work with children for as well. Number one, do you use a different kind of technique? And number two, how do you kind of convince young children who maybe have issues with anxiety to become invested in doing breath work and sitting them down for long enough?
It's a great question. So my youngest are identical twin girls, and during COVID, they were fine. After COVID, they immediately developed extraordinary anxiety out of nowhere, and they were two brave little girls. They'd go cycling off to the park. So I had to go and find. I knew the breath could help them, but I wasn't sure exactly how it could help them. So I had to go find two experts, two clinical psychiatrists in Columbia University, who has used breathing to deal with, help children particularly deal with trauma in extreme circumstances, like in the genocide in Rwanda and after 9/11, all these things. So I went and trained with them and developed these recordings for my girls. So the answer to your question is that the child won't want to sit down to do any breathing. But what the child and the teenagers, so I do a lot of work with children and teenagers, what both the child and the teenager will do, whether or not we're aware of it, is mimic the parent or mimic the teacher, whoever it is. So we found out through lots of testing with different schools and parents and everything, that the best way to do it was the very last thing at night, when everyone's in bed and the lights are off and stories are read, it's all the next step is going to sleep. The parent lies down with the child and they play the recordings together. And we have these beautiful recordings. We have a whole program for children on the website, and the recordings are 3 minutes long or 10 minutes long or 20 minutes long, and they're very gentle ways of breathing. And what we found was that the children don't need a lot of breathing to really help them. They're not hung up about, am I doing it correctly or anything like that. They just kind of follow along as best they can. They need very soft, gentle breathing. And so we developed these recordings that incorporate feedback from the parents. So some of the children were saying, we love birds. So there's recordings with bird song. Some of them were like, we love the sea. So recordings with the sea. And we created these kind of soundscapes where the child just kind of drifts along with what they're hearing. And what the recordings have, it's a program called Blissful Breathing for Children and Teenagers. And what we found from the feedback was that the children wanted longer recordings. So now we have these 20-minute long recordings that are just a little bit of breathing and a little bit of visualization about blowing their worries away over the night sky, and then this beautiful kind of soft sounds like the sea, and the children just drift off. So after maybe 5 months, which was originally started just to help our girls, we work with maybe 10 schools in Ireland now, and quite like about 70 or 80 different families around Ireland, and the idea is that they just play the children whenever they need them, because the idea as well is when the crisis is happening, it's too late to teach them how to breathe. We have to do the work beforehand. So if my girls were getting real anxious, I couldn't say to them in that moment, I couldn't teach them in that moment how to do the breathing. But if we had done the recordings the nights before, when it came to the anxiety then, we could then go back to the breathing in the moment because they had done it before.